If you believe the 70 weeks aren't finished,
He chose poorly.
okay, I'm going to try to make this as simple as possible, what the argument is. So, 70 weeks are determined, allotted, cut off upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, etc. Everybody agrees that this is speaking of predicting Jesus' death, at least Jesus' death and when he's resurrected, which brings atonement for iniquity. Okay? That is salvation. Now, we know there's a decree, verse 25, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem, restore and build, unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Now, here's the key point. Whatever your timeline is, and there's only one that works, by the way, but I'm not going to get into that. We know this. This is something we can all agree on. After the 62 weeks, Messiah is cut off. The 62 weeks after the 62 weeks. We know that there's 7 weeks first, then 62. That leaves 1 week. Verse 26. Alls we know, everyone agrees this is Jesus, Messiah being cut off and dying, not for himself, okay, like in Isaiah 53. But notice, after. In other words, after the 7 and 62 weeks, because the 62 is after the 7, after 69 weeks. It's not at the end of, it's not during. It is clearly and unmistakably after. Not on the tail end, not during, not sometime in the midst of, but after. You know what that means? That means this is saying that Jesus dies sometime after the 69 weeks have passed of the 70. If you say there's a time gap, that is a time period, and the 70th week has to start back up again, that means that when Jesus died, so usually the response goes something like, well, it says after the 69th week, they don't have a problem. People don't have a problem with accepting that until somebody points out, well, look at verse 24, which, by the way, is clearly talking about Jesus, not any antichrist. There's no antichrist anywhere, except for what could be called a type of him, but to the original audience, that has no application. It was Titus, of course, because it's mentioning what would happen to the city, but the focus is on the Messiah. In verse 24, it's what the Messiah does. Verse 25, it's when the Messiah comes. In verse 26, it's what happens to him. And gall darn it, 27 is suddenly the Antichrist, even though Jesus made a new covenant with his blood, which is a fulfillment of verse 24. So, look, you know it says after the 69th week he dies. But unfortunately, you didn't think very carefully, because if you're taught by the word of God and not parroting what you were taught, you would see that 70 weeks are a time limit that God has put on it by the word of God, by his word. If you invent a gap, okay, let's consider it. Okay, Jesus dies after the 69th week. Okay, I've considered your gap and I've discarded it into the garbage can. Why? because it makes Jesus fail the prophecy, which makes him not the Messiah. And it causes you to make Satan the Messiah in verse 27. God forbid. We'll work with you for now. And you cast it into the future. Well, I hope Satan will save you someday. Okay. Now, do I think you're not a Christian because you think Jesus is Satan in this verse? No, you're just terribly misled. Jesus has to fulfill the prophecy according to the word of God. If your view casts the 70th week in the future, it is false, and you must start over. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Apparently, this is how we operate in Christianity. We call each other heretics and say your system is false. Well, here it is. Your system is false. If you continue to teach it after having it demonstrated to you that you've made Jesus Satan, you've made it so that we don't have a Messiah according to the word of God, you are a heretic, and you should immediately stop teaching and either try panhandling or maybe flipping burgers.